On the night of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson should have been doing something ordinary. He should have been driving home after celebrating the end of the school year with friends from Minnesota West Community and Technical College. He had plans like any other 19-year-old. He was studying wind energy. He was thinking about the future. He was expected home. Instead, somewhere in the darkness of rural Minnesota, his car slipped off the road and into a ditch, and a quiet, routine night became one of the most haunting missing person cases in modern American history. Brandon had been in Canby, Minnesota, celebrating the last day of classes. At some point late that night, he got into his Chevrolet Lumina and started the drive back toward Marshall, where his parents lived. It was a route he knew. The roads were lonely, bordered by farm fields, gravel shoulders, drainage ditches, and stretches of darkness that could make even familiar places feel strange. Just before 2 in the morning, Brandon called his parents. He told them he had gone off the road and gotten stuck in a ditch. But he also told them something important. He wasn't hurt. He was calm enough to explain the situation. He needed help, not rescue. His mother and father, Annette and Brian Swanson, got into their truck and headed out immediately. Brandon believed he was near the small town of Lind, Minnesota. He could see lights, and in the darkness, that gave him confidence that he knew where he was. His parents drove toward Lind while keeping him on the phone. What none of them realized was that Brandon was wrong about his location. Very wrong. In the blackness of country roads and empty land, the lights he saw had tricked him, and that small mistake would change everything that followed. In cases like this, a few miles can become the difference between rescue and disappearance. At that moment, none of them knew they were already driving into the beginning of a mystery. As Brian and Annette drove, Brandon stayed on the phone and tried to help them find him. At first, the plan sounded simple. His parents would drive to the area he believed he was in, and he would flash his headlights so they could spot him in the dark. They searched. He flashed the lights, or at least he thought he did. But neither side could see the other. His parents saw no lights in the distance. Brandon saw no sign of their truck. Over and over, they tried to connect the map in his head to the roads beneath their tires, and over, nothing matched. The fields were silent. The roads were empty. The night felt larger every minute. The conversation stretched on. By some accounts, Brandon stayed on the call with his father for close to 47 minutes. During that time, he did not sound panicked. That detail matters because in most disappearance cases, there is a moment when fear enters the voice. In Brandon's case, the fear came late. Before that, there was frustration, confusion, and stubborn determination. He was a young man who thought he could solve his own problem. Eventually, he told his parents he was going to leave the car and walk toward the lights he believed marked Lind. He thought it would be faster. He thought he could meet them on foot. He began crossing the dark rural landscape while still talking to his father. He described fences. He mentioned terrain. At one point, he crossed what sounded like a small stream or body of water. In daylight, that area would have been difficult enough to navigate. At 2 in the morning, under a dark sky, with uneven ground and little sense of direction, every step was a risk. But the call continued, and as long as the line stayed open, his parents believed they still had a chance to reach him before anything truly terrible happened to him. The longer he kept talking, the more they believed the ending would still be simple. Find the road, reach the lights, get in the truck, go home, laugh about it tomorrow. Then came the moment that would define the entire case. While still on the phone with his father, Brandon suddenly shouted an expletive, an abrupt, shocked, "Oh, shit!" And then there was silence. No explanation, no clear footsteps, no obvious struggle, just a sharp burst of alarm, followed by dead air. Brian kept listening, hoping to hear movement, breathing, anything that might explain what had happened. But the line had effectively gone still. Brandon did not come back on. The call ended, and with it went the last confirmed contact anyone would ever have with him. Brian immediately tried to call back. Again and again he dialed Brandon's number, expecting maybe a dropped call, maybe a broken signal, maybe a simple accident. But there was no answer. The phone rang out or went straight to nothing. Out in the dark, with no clear location and no way to reach his son, a helpless dread began to settle in. Brandon had not sounded like someone joking. He had not sounded drunk enough to be incoherent. Whatever triggered that final outburst had happened suddenly. Something in front of him, beneath him, or around him had changed in an instant. His parents continued searching through the night. They drove roads near Lind, scanning ditches and fields, trying to make sense of where he could have gone. But there was one impossible problem built into every search they made. Brandon was not where he thought he was. The geography in his mind and the geography on the ground were no longer the same. By dawn, the uncertainty had hardened into something worse. At about 6:30 that morning, his parents reported him missing. At first, they did not receive the urgency they expected. Some officers initially treated it like a young adult out too late after celebrating. But for Brian and Annette, it never felt ordinary. Their son had vanished in the middle of a phone call, and they knew that was not normal. Later that day, investigators began to understand just how badly everyone had been searching in the wrong place. By using Brandon's cell phone records, authorities were able to narrow down the actual area from which he had made the calls. He was not near Lind at all. He was roughly 20 to 25 miles away, near Taunton, along Highway 68 and the Lincoln County line. That revelation explained everything about the failed search. His parents had never seen his headlights because he was guiding them to a place where he simply wasn't. Searchers found Brandon's Chevrolet Lumina abandoned in a ditch off a gravel road north of Highway 68. The car itself offered almost nothing dramatic. There were no signs of a violent confrontation at the vehicle. No clear evidence that someone had dragged him away from the scene. No blood. No desperate note. It looked, in many ways, exactly like Brandon had described it. A car stuck off the road after a nighttime mistake. That detail made the mystery sharper, not weaker. If the accident had been minor, and if Brandon had survived it uninjured, how had he disappeared so completely only a short time later? The landscape around the car was open and deceptive. In the daytime, investigators could see fields, roads, creeks, and patches of rough ground. But at night, all of it would have blended into uncertainty. Distance becomes difficult to judge in flat country. Small streams can look like narrow puddles. Fences appear and disappear in shadow. A person walking alone, believing town lights are close when they are still far away, can lose direction faster than anyone expects. Search teams began combing the area, and trained dogs were brought in. Each hour raised the stakes. If Brandon was injured and alive, time mattered. If he had fallen into water, time mattered. If someone else had encountered him on that isolated land, time mattered even more. In the days that followed, the search became intense. Volunteers, officers, family members, and trained teams combed through the farmland and drainage areas near where Brandon's car had been found. Concern centered on the Yellow Medicine River and its nearby waterways. In May, after spring melt and rain, water levels could run fast. Some investigators believed Brandon may have stumbled into the river in the dark after crossing fences and uneven land. A single misstep, especially at night, could cause a fall that a person could not recover from. That final cry on the phone fit a sudden drop or unseen hazard. But the case refused to cooperate with simple answers. Searches of the river and surrounding terrain did not produce Brandon's body. Tracking dogs reportedly followed scent trails toward water, but that alone did not create certainty. Water often erases evidence as much as it explains it. But the absence of a body kept other possibilities alive. Could he have been injured and wandered farther than expected? Could he have reached a road and encountered another person? Could foul play have occurred after the call ended? Officials did not have the evidence to confirm any theory completely. What made the disappearance especially unsettling was how narrow the window seemed to be. Brandon was alive, talking, moving, and describing what he saw. Then, in a moment, he was gone. Cases with gradual loss of contact often leave room for interpretation. Brandon's case left a sharp edge. A young man walking through darkness, a sudden exclamation, and then absolute silence. Searches continued, but no conclusive trace appeared. No wallet turned up in a field. No clothing definitively answered what happened. The land had become a maze of possibilities. For his family, that uncertainty became its own torment, because not knowing can last longer than grief. As weeks turned into months, Brandon's disappearance shifted into long-term mystery. Fields were searched again after crops changed and visibility improved. Investigators returned in different seasons, working around weather and terrain that had made earlier searches difficult. The search area expanded over time. Those repeated searches show that no one treated this as a solved accident. Too many questions remained open. His parents never stopped pushing. Annette and Brandon Swanson became the human center of the case, repeating the facts, preserving the timeline, and refusing to let their son's name fade into the background of old headlines. They left a porch light on through the night as a symbol of hope and waiting. That image stayed with many people because it turned an investigation into something painfully intimate. Behind every map, every dog team, every phone record, there was a family holding itself together through uncertainty. The missing do not disappear alone. They take normal life with them. Meals change. Sleep changes. Every unknown sound at night becomes a possibility. Theories multiplied because the evidence remained thin. Some believed Brandon drowned and his body was simply never recovered. Others thought he may have been disoriented enough to wander farther than expected. Some also could not dismiss foul play, given the isolated roads and the vulnerability of someone walking alone in darkness. Investigators publicly acknowledged there was no evidence strong enough to confirm exactly what happened. That careful language matters. It is easy to force a story into a neat explanation, but this case resists that. The lack of physical proof means every theory has to live beside the others. One of the most important consequences of Brandon's disappearance did not happen in a field or along a riverbank. It happened in law. In the aftermath of the case, Brandon's family pushed for changes in how missing person reports were handled in Minnesota. They had experienced firsthand what it felt like to report a disappearance and meet hesitation because the missing person was legally an adult. That hesitation can be catastrophic. The first hours of a disappearance are often the most important. Delays shrink chances, scatter evidence, and force families to fight for urgency. The effort eventually led to what became known as Brandon's Law. Minnesota lawmakers revised missing person procedures, including requirements that law enforcement accept reports promptly and not dismiss them simply because the person might have left voluntarily or because little time had passed. The law also strengthened procedures around missing and endangered persons and created a clearer response framework. Brandon's case changed the rules so future families might not meet the same early resistance. This part of the story matters because it shows that a disappearance can leave marks beyond the mystery itself. Brandon was still missing. His family still had no final answer, but they forced the system to learn something from the failure of uncertainty and delay. People often imagine justice only as an arrest or a solved case. Here, justice took another form: reform. Not complete, not comforting, but real. The state of Minnesota formally altered the way it handles cases involving missing persons, and Brandon's name became attached to that change. It is a strange legacy, built from absence instead of return. Yet it also means that Brandon did not vanish into silence entirely. His story entered the law books, where it still speaks in a different voice. Do not wait, do not assume, and do not treat uncertainty as a reason to do nothing. Years passed, but Brandon's case never truly became old. In 2010, the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension took over as the lead agency, and that mattered because it showed the disappearance was still being treated as active and unresolved. Tips continued to come in. Search areas shifted as investigators reassessed terrain, scent trails, water routes, and overlooked pockets of land. Reports over the years described renewed searches near Mud Creek, the Yellow Medicine River, and surrounding rural ground. By then, the case had taken the shape of the hardest mysteries. Enough detail to keep it alive, but not enough evidence to bring it to rest. For the public, Brandon's final words became the center of fascination. People fixated on that sudden exclamation because it felt like a doorway frozen half open. Did he trip into a creek? Fall down an embankment? Encounter an animal, a hidden hole, or another person. The mind keeps trying to complete the sentence after, "Oh, shit," as if the missing final seconds might solve everything. But real life is crueler than fiction. Sometimes the most important moment is the one we only hear the beginning of. There is also the haunting problem of distance. Brandon was not at home, not in town, not in a crowded place where witnesses might fill in the blanks. He was in a landscape that can swallow detail. Rural darkness is not cinematic darkness. It is practical, heavy, and confusing. A person can be close to a road and still unseen. A body can be missed by a search if terrain, water, vegetation, or timing interfere. Yet those same facts do not eliminate darker possibilities. The remoteness that supports an accidental death theory also supports the possibility that no one would have seen an encounter with another human being. That is why the case remains so powerful. Every explanation seems possible until the moment you demand proof. And then, suddenly, none of them are enough. To understand why Brandon's disappearance still unsettles people, you have to picture the human side of the timeline. A 19-year-old calls home because something minor has gone wrong. Car in a ditch. A request for a ride. That was all. It is the kind of problem families solve every day. Parents drive out, mildly annoyed, relieved that their child is okay. Then reality slides sideways. Wrong location, bad visibility, a decision to walk, and suddenly an ordinary family errand becomes a permanent mystery. That is what makes the story so terrifying. It begins with normal life. Brandon was described as intelligent, curious, and close to his family. He had graduated from Marshall High School and was studying wind turbines, with plans that extended beyond that year. He also intended to continue his education. These details matter because they push back against the assumption that missing young adults simply drift away. Brandon had a direction. He had relationships. He called his parents for help, which suggests not only trust, but also expectation. He fully believed he would be found. That confidence is heartbreaking in retrospect. He thought he was moving toward safety, not away from it. And maybe that is the darkest lesson hidden in the case. People often imagine disappearances as dramatic abductions or obvious crimes. But some disappearances happen in the thin space between confidence and error. A person is not reckless enough to feel doomed, and not safe enough to realize how vulnerable he is. Brandon was walking through fields, talking to his father, narrating his own rescue. In his mind, he was still inside the story of getting home. His parents were still inside it too. None of them knew they had already crossed into the story of never knowing. That transition, from inconvenience to irreversible mystery, can happen without warning, and that is why the case still haunts people. Today, Brandon Swanson's case remains unsolved. No definitive evidence has closed it. No final discovery has explained exactly what happened after that last phone call in rural Minnesota. What survives instead is a timeline, a voice on a cell phone, an abandoned car in a ditch, and a family that refused to let silence be the final answer. Investigators have searched, reassessed, and listened to tips. The law changed because of him, but the essential question still stands where it stood in May of 2008. What happened in the seconds after Brandon cried out into the dark? There are stories that frighten because they are violent, and there are stories that frighten because they are unfinished. Brandon's belongs to the second kind. It leaves behind no courtroom, no confession, no final scene, only fragments. A road, a field, water somewhere nearby, a father listening helplessly into a phone. For many people, that is worse than a solved tragedy because a solved tragedy at least has edges. Brandon's story has only distance. If you use this case in a narrated video, that is where its power truly lies, not in exaggeration, and not in invention but in restraint. A real young man disappeared after what should have been a minor accident. His parents were almost there, and yet impossibly far away. Search teams walked the land for years. His name entered state law. And still, somewhere between a ditch, a field, and that final unfinished moment, the truth remains hidden. Maybe Brandon slipped into water. Maybe he encountered something or someone unexpected. Maybe the answer is simpler than all the theories. waiting in some overlooked corner of the landscape. But until that proof appears, the last call remains exactly what it has always been. A real voice, a real night, and one of the most chilling endings to an ordinary conversation ever recorded in the memory of a family.